We are back on the Critic Circle right here on Radio Brave. As I teased at the end of last segment, we have a special guest in studio, Mr. Jonathan Sands, the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. He is a special guest this show, thanks to Doug Harris of Noisemaker Communications for making this all happen. He's here to discuss the legacy of his great-grandfather, as well as comment on the new film Churchill, starring Brian Cox. Doug, since this is all you, I will let you lead the way.
Wow. Great way to start the day. And we also want to welcome Dr. Donna Copeland.
Dr. Donna Copeland as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think this is a rare opportunity, perhaps historic in the life of the Houston Film Critics Society, because we've had special guests before, but this is a really unusual circumstance. We have this new release called Churchill, not a documentary, a dramatic interpretation. Big name stars, and we have with us in the studio, as you said, the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, Jonathan Sands.
And we are broadcasting this live on Facebook Live on Radio Brave. So for those tuning in or listening to us as it happens, you can see us on Facebook Live.
Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Doug. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Before we get started, could I ask you just to briefly trace your lineage so we'll understand where you are in the Churchill bloodline and how the connection is?
Certainly. My grandmother was Diana, and Churchill's daughter, and she married my grandfather, Duncan Sands, and they had my father, Julian, and my two aunts, Edwina and Celia, and obviously I come down the line from my father, Julian.
Wonderful. Now, let's take a moment and just sort of deal with the unusual spelling of your last name as opposed to its pronunciation.
Yes, it's spelled S-A-N-D-Y-S. And a lot of people throughout my life have called me Sandys. And in fact, actually, my wife has a very funny story. When I first met her, she had listened to my name being pronounced for about 45 minutes, and then she promptly said, "Hello, Mr. Sandys." Yeah. And I stupidly corrected her and said it's actually pronounced Sands, and she thought I was incredibly arrogant. But then I quickly saved myself by saying to her, "But please, just call me Jonathan."
Nice. Well played, sir. Well played.
Indeed. So, yeah.
So you and I had an opportunity to see in advance a screening of this film
Yes.
in a private theater in the north part of the city with our good friend Leonard Courtwright.
Yeah, I love private theaters.
Yes.
It was lovely, and we watched, and I sort of watched the expression on your face, and I was intrigued, and I'm now ready to hear. Let's start from a purely historical accuracy standpoint. What is your take on this new release, the newest movie about Churchill called Churchill?
From a purely historical aspect.
Let's start with that, yes.
Okay. It's set at the right time and in the right place.
So this is days before the D-Day invasion.
Yes, yeah. This begins. It begins 6 days before the actual invasion itself. So it's set at the right place and the right time. Unfortunately, from there on, it becomes a fiction, and not a historical fiction or anything like that. It's total fiction.
Well, so let's dive into that a little. I love that. I see that headline showing up somewhere in Variety. But the point is, let's sort of dive in. I think we can all universally agree, because Donna and Travis have also seen the film, that this is a portrayal of Churchill we have not previously seen. We have not seen him presented, if I can make a generalization, as an opponent, a violent opponent of D-Day, of the invasion.
It's not true. He wasn't. Churchill, it was actually Churchill who was very instrumental when it came to General Eisenhower coming and being the supreme Allied commander. Churchill was the one who contacted Roosevelt and said, "Look, I really would like Ike to do this." And the reason being is because they had met in 1942, and Churchill realized that in Eisenhower he actually had somebody who was like-minded. The plans for D-Day had already been laid in place some months before, and it does allude to that in the film, at the very beginning, where you see it being spoken that this was in play for a month. The reason that I know that this film is complete fiction is because the one part of history that they miss out is Operation Mincemeat. Now, Operation Mincemeat came prior to, obviously, D-Day. We were trying to trick Adolf Hitler into moving his troops so that we could have an easier access to then retake France. We knew we needed to retake France, so that part was right. But Operation Mincemeat depended on a young man who at the time was completely and utterly unknown. He had literally just died, and the War Office asked his family if they would be prepared to give his body over to be used for a secret operation. And the condition was that as long as he had a proper Christian burial. And so this was agreed. You know, we knew that the Germans would give a proper Christian burial, or at least the French would give a proper Christian burial. And what happened was this chap was loaded with papers, supposedly secret documents about the Allies' plan to actually invade through Calais. And we stuffed these papers onto him and then basically dropped him out of a plane into the channel, and he swept in with the tide and was found on one of the beaches. And so we were counting on Hitler reading these plans and thinking, oh, great, okay, fine, we know exactly where they're going to go from, and so we'll move our troops. Well, that's exactly what happened. He did. He moved an awful lot of his troops to go and protect those other areas that we had highlighted in those papers. And so this is why I know that this film, you know, sadly the screenwriter, you know, she comes from Oxford University, which surprises me. But then, if you think about Oxford University, they were the people in the 1930s who said that if we go to war, then none of us are going to fight. So, you know, I'm very surprised that she has thrown a great inaccuracy on history.
To my colleagues, from the standpoint, because frankly, I found the film visually arresting. I thought it was beautifully shot. And so to the filmmaker's credit, care to weigh in on that, and also maybe the performances of Brian Cox and Miranda?
Well,
yes.
Go ahead, Don.
I really thought it was a very good portrayal of somebody in crisis, which they showed him to be. You know, he was needing to change his life's role, and guilt was racking him and clouding his judgment, according to the movie. And so this part, and the part Clementine played in advising him, both of those I thought were wonderful. And it was only later, because I'm not up on Churchill history, I didn't realize that it was so far from truth. So I was really liking the movie until I found that
What are
out.
your thoughts of the portrayal of Clemmy? I believe she was favorably.
I would like the one very positive thing that I have to say about the film is that the actors were amazing. Okay,
Yes.
it's not the
It
actors
really is
that
an
let us
actor
down. And
showcase.
Brian Cox. I
Oh,
see
yeah.
very few good Winston Churchills. Albert Finney was the best that I've ever seen. But I have to say, Brian Cox, he's an incredibly accomplished actor and did really well. Miranda Richardson, once again, played it
Yes.
incredibly well. However, Donna, what I would like to say is my great-grandfather was not in crisis at that time. Certainly he was
That's
haunted by
part of the
Gallipoli.
fiction.
Yeah. Certainly he was haunted by Gallipoli, but the portrayal of my great-grandparents as being separate entities, yes, Clementine did advise Churchill all the way through, but she was never aloof from him in the way that it's portrayed in this film, and it shows a horrible relationship that really didn't exist. They loved each other devotedly, and Clementine would often advise him. And Churchill never lost his temper in the way that it's portrayed. I mean, he did in the 1940s, but then Clementine was the one who drew him back and said, look, you've got all this power, I appreciate you are under stress, but you need to treat people properly. And at the end of the war, it was those who had worked closely with him who had said he was such a wonderful, loving man. He was basically like a cuddly teddy bear. So this entire portrayal has been taken apart, but the acting, the actors, the absolute screening of it is brilliant. I love the actors.
Let's speak to the cinematography, because I overuse this phrase, visually arresting. I mean, these beautifully shots, the way they're blocked and lit, and the composition of the shot, and it's just remarkable.
Especially
too.
especially the bookend sequences by the sea, where in the beginning you see his hat and it goes into the water, and you see like the bloody water coming back.
Reference to the
Gallipoli.
Yeah.
Gallipoli. And then at the very end, with him having his hat on the cane and the way you see the shadow in the sand. I thought that was a great shot to leave the film on such a high note. And as Jonathan said, this really is an actor's showcase by Brian Cox and Miranda Richardson. And even John Slattery as General Eisenhower also did a very good job.
You see, that's the other thing. Eisenhower, the relationship between Churchill and Eisenhower was not as it is portrayed. You know, Eisenhower was not an arrogant, bumptious man, and I think you would find that his children and grandchildren would be deeply offended by the portrayal. He had the deepest respect for Winston Churchill, and indeed, you know, you hear people like Montgomery calling him Winston and calling him Churchill and things like that. They didn't do that. There was a line of respect. He was the Prime Minister. He outranked all of them.
We're talking with Jonathan Sands, the great-grandson of Winston Churchill. We're here on the Critics Circle. Travis will be back shortly. What lies ahead?
We're going to talk about more of Jonathan Sands continuing the legacy of Sir Winston Churchill and talk about the new releases, Captain Underpants and I, Daniel Blake, right here on Radio Brave. We are back on the Crit Circle right here on Radio Brave, brought to you each and every week by Leonard Courtwright of Allied Siding and Windows. We are continuing our conversation with Jonathan Sands, the great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. We had talked about the new release film Churchill, starring Brian Cox and Miranda Richardson. But I'd like to talk about more of the work that Sands has done to continue the legacy of Sir Winston Churchill, because Doug Harris and Dr. Don Copeland also with me on the show. Doug, you sent us the link to his website, and I was checking it out, and I was...
You were trying to find out if I was legitimate.
It's like, why does he have this Y in his name? And it's pronounced Sands. Yeah, that's what I really wanted to figure out. But don't worry, Jonathan, because my last name is Lemons, and there's an A with Lemons, and people always mispronounce it, so I understand where you come from.
No one ever mispronounces Doug or Donna, so we're
we're
thanks
good.
to our parents for that. Well, I think it's important to note that Jonathan has fully embraced his remarkable ancestors' work, but to the point of dedicating his life to the history, chronicling, discovery, still new things, and these are manifested in your books. So why don't you take a minute and tell us about the books that are out there and your websites as well. This is the opportunity to tell the world how they can find out more.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Well, I wrote a book, God and Churchill, and it came out in 2015, and it's been a wild success. Everybody I've come across and spoken to absolutely loves the book. It's the last bit of new evidence that will come out on my great-grandfather. It's proof that Churchill really did have a faith in God, a very real faith in God, and indeed that he was right in his own professed belief that God protected and directed him throughout his life. And so it's based on fact, not on supposition, which, you know, some people are going to say, no, you can't do that. Well, you know, read the book and see for yourself. The one book that I always recommend as a brilliant book, I mean, in fact, there are two books that I recommend. If you're going to start with Winston Churchill, you really want to start with Churchill's own book, My Early Life, which really is, it's an incredibly entertaining story, taking you up to when he becomes 25 and goes into Parliament. But the next book that I would recommend that you read, if you want to have a nice overview of Churchill's life, is Martin Gilbert's book. It's called Churchill, A Life. Now, don't be put off. It is 1,066 pages. Okay, and for those in Britain, you'll understand 1066 is a very significant date for us. So, you know, for you guys, that terrible, infamous year that we won't talk about was significant. But so don't be put off by that, and bring some hope to that thought that it is 8,000 pages combined into 1,000 pages with an accompanying 23,000 other pages that also could have been in it. So I'm asking you to read 1,000 pages.
God bless the editors. Now, but the God and Churchill is not your only personal work. You've written another book as well?
I'm writing a book at this moment. It's a different type of quotes book. It's called Churchill Then and Now, and it's a very personal story. I've made a living out of going around talking about the legacy of my great-grandfather, because Churchill's life story and his quotes really changed my life. And through Churchill Then and Now, through this quotes book that I'm bringing out hopefully next year, it's slated to bring out next year, I'm sharing how those quotes changed my life, how that story changed my life, and how it can actually affect your lives, how you can employ Churchill in your own personal and indeed professional life, and how it can guide you. So it's the one quotes book that I've never found out there. So it's called Churchill Then and Now.
Now, this is not the first time that Hollywood has taken note of the Churchill legacy. Let's revisit. Now, you were involved at one time with an HBO production, correct?
I wasn't involved with it, but yes, I screened it when I first came over to Houston.
How'd they do?
Okay, the first film that HBO produced was The Gathering Storm. It was amazing. It was the 10 years leading up to the Second World War. That was Albert Finney, okay, and I loved Albert Finney as Churchill. I mean, absolutely amazing, Winston Churchill. The second one that they produced, which is the one that I screened in Houston, was called Into the Storm. And I'm really sorry, but I didn't like that film at all. It portrayed Churchill as a man who swore all the time, I mean, effing and blinding and things like that. Churchill had a wide enough command of the English language that he didn't have to use the F word. And so it's a very bad portrayal of Churchill from that point of view. So if you're going to watch the HBO one, you watch The Gathering Storm, which is, as I said, the 10 years leading up.
Now, Travis, we were talking earlier about an upcoming Churchill-themed production that stars Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman is playing Winston Churchill in a film called Darkest Hour from Joe Wright. Joe Wright did Pride and Prejudice and Atonement, so he is well-versed in doing period dramas. And I still can recall when I saw that first publicity shot of Gary Oldman as Winston Churchill, and I was absolutely floored, because Gary Oldman is a very chameleon-like actor who really becomes the characters that he plays. And I can already say that the prosthetic makeup to make him as Churchill is definitely Oscar caliber.
If I may just add something into that.
That's why you're here. Go ahead.
When they said that Gary Oldman was going to play Winston Churchill, I thought, oh my gosh, how's that going to work? But then I think once you've seen The Crown and you've seen John Lithgow playing Winston Churchill in such a successful way, I think you can accept the fact that Gary Oldman plays Winston Churchill. I am very much looking forward to seeing that film and commenting on that film. I think that's going to be fun to watch.
I might even go so far as to say that Churchill's been a fairly neglected figure by Hollywood, other than these notable efforts we've just mentioned. Anything else come to mind? I'm trying to remember.
Well, I mean, even in Quentin Tarantino's *Inglourious Bastards*, Sir Winston Churchill had a nice cameo appearance by one actor, and he was featured in the Oscar-winning *The King's Speech*. He was played by Timothy Spall, which was a nice about-face because you got to see King George and Churchill, played by James Purefoy, who actually, as it is right now, James Purefoy is playing on a show on Sundance called Hap and Collins, which takes place in East Texas, so he has a nice East Texas twang in his accent.
It's just fast. I'm astounded that in the last 10, 15 years, look at the stories related to World War II that have just sort of reappeared. A monument. I'm looking at this. Did we not know these stories before? It's just
well, I mean, the filmmaker that made Churchill a few years ago, he made The Railway Man, which was based on a true story. And we saw
fabulous film. That's a Colin
Firth and
Colin
Nicole
Firth.
Kidman.
Fabulous film.
Angelina Jolie did Unbroken, based off the Laura Hillebrand novel. So these stories do exist. It's just, I think, finding the right person to tell that story and get it out to the general public, because you can find these stories in books, but not many people read, and you want to give them these stories, and the only way to really do it is in a visual medium.
Well, that's all. People ask me, have you read the book? No, I watched the movie. In the book, you have your own, you conjure up your own physical images of the characters. In the movie, they do it for you.
But you see, that's the trouble. We are relying too much on movies these days for our information, and we've seen it. And Donna, I'm sure you agree with me with Churchill, that the portrayal is incorrect, and if you just depend on the movie, you're not going to get anything.
And so I have to ask, I recently saw this production called Churchill's Secret, about when he had a stroke.
Yes.
Have you seen that?
I have indeed, yes.
Is that what?
No, that
Tell
is
me
true.
about that.
That is true. Churchill did actually have a stroke, and he didn't actually know about it. Nobody told him. It took a couple of days for him to recover, but as far as he was concerned, he had the flu or something like that. But it was felt that it wasn't insignificant, but we didn't want to, or they didn't want to worry Churchill with it, and certainly they weren't going to tell President Roosevelt that Churchill had a stroke. So yes, that is true. That is very true, and the man survived and survived and survived,
Yes,
and lived up to the age of 90 years old. So yeah.
Right. That was nice to hear.
The movie is called Churchill. It opened, actually last night, June the 2nd, and stars Brian Cox and Miranda Richardson. And we think we've pretty well decided that it's taken some profound liberties with historical facts.
Yeah, but only with the script.
Yeah.
But I want, but as I said before, and as I will say again, I would love to take all of the actors that were in Churchill, and I would like to put them in a film where the screenwriter actually knows what they're writing about and actually understands the history, and hasn't just watched South Park to see Winston Churchill or seen some joke thing to get some idea of, hey, okay, this is the Churchill that I think. I want a professional screenwriter, somebody, the person who wrote Unbroken or something like that, to come in and take those wonderful actors and place them in a film that really, really justifies putting them in there, because I've seen those actors in so many different things. And Miranda Richardson in Blackadder, the Queen, was amazing, and then Brian Cox in Sharp with Sean Bean. These people deserve the accolade of being great actors. It's just such a shame they got such a terrible script.
And where can we find more about Jonathan Sands? That's Lead Like. I'll let you give the URLs.
If you want to know more about me, or if you'd like to know more about my book, God and Churchill, you will find me at leadlikechurchill.org. So once again, that's leadlikechurchill.org. And I also have a blog that is called The Churchill Bulletin. If you go to churchillbulletin.com, it will take you straight to that.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Mr. Sands. And
Yes.
as you say, you are working on a quote book, and I have to leave this segment with a quote from Winston Churchill that I found great. If we open a quarrel between past and present, we shall find we have lost the future.
You know why he said that quote?
I do not. Tell us
He
real
was
quick.
in 1940 when he became prime minister. He was widely criticised because he decided to include people such as Lord Halifax, who had been an appeaser, in his cabinet. But Churchill had no interest in taking revenge on those who had stood against him.
Well, you heard it there first.
What a
Something
morning,
else
huh?
to admire him for.
What a morning.
All right, we have more coming up on the Critics Circle where we talk the new releases, Captain Underpants and I, Daniel Blake. So stay tuned for more right here on Radio Brave.